Welcome to another Online Personals Watch CEO interview. Today I'm joined by Ashish Kundra, who is the CEO and founder of myZamana.com, which is an Indian, primarily Indian dating site, right? I see that 70% of your traffic on Alexa is actually in India.
Yep, that's correct. We primarily get our traffic from India.
Gotcha. And what's your background? Because I see you studied at Columbia University, industrial engineering, and you also worked at Meatwad.
I did. So I interned at myZamana during college, and it was my first exposure to the dating space, and it was a hugely informative experience. I was working with Andrew Weinrich, Jeremy, the CTO, and a handful of two or three others that were all very smart, supportive, and really great to work with. And so I worked there during college, and then when I graduated, I moved to Boston, and I didn't have a job, so I just started programming various sites. And this was one idea that had been floating around in my head for quite some time, since my sister, who is obviously Indian, was single, was looking for a date, and I thought, why don't I build her a service? And that's how it all got started.
And what did you learn from Meatwad, really? Because that seems very relevant to the Indian market. I understand that the last numbers I got, 49% of all internet usage is on mobile in India, which is the biggest. I think there's a couple of countries in Africa which have higher mobile usage, but that's huge.
Yeah. I mean, Meatwad was definitely very, very early on in the mobile dating space. At that time, when we would pitch it to people, they would say, really? I mean, it was an unfamiliar concept to people at that point in time, which is funny because now, like, the mantra is mobile first. But yeah, it was, I think it was a bit, Meatwad was very early to the market. I remember when we were developing WAP phones, or WAP apps, which is basically mobile web pages before, this was before the app marketplaces. And, I think they've seen the progression of mobile, and they've been thinking about this idea for some time, so they probably have a competitive edge as a result of that.
And how did you prime the pumps at myZamana? How did you start off, and how many users do you have now?
Yeah, sure. So it initially started, I sort of alluded to it earlier, but I started as almost like a J-date for Indians. So I was primarily focused on the U.S. market, which in retrospect was the completely wrong way to go about it, which, according to my goal was to build a very large, long-term, mainstream site, and it turns out the Indian market is much larger than the Indians in the U.S. market. There are 4 million South Asians in the U.S. and 1 billion in India, and also the U.S. market. It's unclear whether Indians here will forever want to be settling down with other Indians. I kind of don't think that's the case. So in that regard, it's very much a shrinking market. Whereas India is set to be the largest country ever by 2050, and so I eventually I started with users in the U.S. I signed up maybe 10,000 users from the large metropolitan areas, and then just naturally I started seeing an influx of users from India until I just really couldn't ignore it. It was more than just a blip on the stats page. It was like the largest source of traffic. So, the users kind of picked the site, I guess, and, within a few months, all of our users were in India, and I started doubling down in that market.
And I understand you forwarded me some numbers, thank you very much. You mentioned that half of the population in India is under 25 at this stage. So, what's their take? What's their thoughts, do you think, on the likes of Shadi and Bharat Matrimony?
So I would say it depends on your background. It depends on the person's background. I mean, if you're from a rural area and you don't have internet connection, then obviously all of this is kind of irrelevant to you. If you're from a more traditional household, let's say in the suburbs or some medium density type of environment, then, Bharat Matrimony and Shadi might be, good options for you. But if you're, living in a city, you're making an income, you might be a bit more educated. I mean, you maybe just, won the lottery in that regard. You might want to choose your own date, and you might not want to be subjected to the kind of patriarchal system of arranged marriages, which I see shadi and barth matrimony as synonymous to. I kind of view them as arranged marriages online. Like there's not really much any cultural difference between the two, and actually working difference. Half the accounts on these sites are created by parents. So, I'd say it depends on who you are. That's the short answer.
And what's myZamana's fit in the market?
So we are basically a mainstream service that helps people meet new people. And so the way I look at it as, if you are looking to get married and that's very important to you, then come on the site. We'll find you people who are ready to get married. If you're looking to meet new people, in a dating context, then come online. We can do that. If you're looking to meet new people just for the sake of meeting new people, maybe you move to a city, that's great too. I mean, the way I look at it is shadi is serving really one part of the spectrum, which is, people looking to get matched in a very, classic way in India, and we're serving a more mainstream market.
And who would you class as your competitors in India?
There are a couple of startups going after the sort of dating, meet new people market, but there isn't like one competitor we really look at. We don't necessarily look at it in that way because it's really early days for the market, so it's unclear what sort of use cases will be shaking out, what kind of sites will be shaking out of this sort of disruptive period. And two, it's such a huge market. Like even if let's say like 10 years from now we were the largest, meeting site for some small segment of the market, that's still huge. Like even if you're like for example, the gay dating leader, whoever that ends up being, is going to be serving a market that's like potentially, hundreds of millions of people, which is crazy. And
you've got 1.2 million members so far. So
yeah, we're 1.2 million, these like active users, and we're growing, fivefold every year. So fingers crossed we'll be one of the leaders that will be in this market. But yeah, it's really early days. I mean, only 11% of the market's online, so we're fairly patient, and we hope we're going to be building up some network advantages and some experiences by being in here early.
How's the infrastructure though? Are you finding most of your users are mobile as well?
Surprisingly, I mean, obviously all of our users have mobile devices, but we still get a lot of traffic from the web. Android is definitely the biggest app platform there, which I think is nice because in terms of development time and development time and user experience, it's so much easier to focus on one dominant platform. But no, I think in terms of infrastructure, the more interesting, the more surprising things, I would say, are that the payment infrastructure is very nascent. So it's really hard to accept payments. We don't. We're actually a free site. We're ad supported, and we really like that model. We think it works really well for us. I would also say that the internet infrastructure is still rapidly improving. So, the powers can be a bit intermittent depending on where you are. This internet speeds aren't really all that great, so you have to be very, cognizant of that when you're developing the site to make sure your page loads are zippy and you're compressing all your static files. And I can go into all the technical details of that, but it's important. And so I think those are two a bit of the more surprising things: the internet infrastructure and the payment infrastructure.
I'm just thinking, 3 or 4 years ago, we did some work with a company called Igniter. You might be familiar with them. They pivoted out of the USA and went over to India. Now they're all based out of India and changed their name to Step Out. It was a group dating app, which seemed to work better in India. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's great that they've seen this market as as one that their product works in, and it's also a really interesting market given all the things, how rapidly it's changing and how large it's eventually going to be. I think it was probably a wise decision for them, and I think they're a pretty significant player in the market. They seem to be doing well, and we obviously wish them the best, and we hope also to be alongside them serving the market.
What's your end goal?
Yeah, I mean that's a good question. I mean,
what should I say? Where will you be in 2 years' time?
2 years' time. I mean, in 2 years' time, if we grow maybe the order of magnitude or two, we'll be definitely a pretty big player in the meeting new people space, meeting new people / dating space. In 2 years' time, what my goal is, I would say it's to build a very large, vibrant community. In 2 years, it really depends on internet penetration in India. I mean, like, this is like sort of the waiting game, the guessing game. Like, when are we going to hit 100% penetration in India, internet penetration? In 2 years, we might be pretty close to it. And we're at 11% now, maybe we'll be at 50%. But I think my goal for now is to see where this goes. I mean, this is just like a really interesting time, and the market is showing no signs of growth, so we'll see.
And in terms of monetization, what are the options that are becoming available now? What do you think it's going to look like in a couple of years' time for means of payment?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So currently there are 4 options. You have mobile payments. Of course, there you take a pretty hefty transaction fee from the carriers, around 75%, and the transactions are capped at around $2, so you're really not. It doesn't really seem worth it for all the friction involved in the payment process. Your second option is brick and mortar payment collections, which is what Shadi and Bharat Matrimony do. Yeah. Your third option is credit card payments online, and that seems. I think credit card penetration last time I checked was around 4%, and so it's around it's fine. It can work for some people, but I think it's hard to do at scale. Fourth option is advertising, and that's what we're really big fans of. We think it aligns the incentive of the business with the user. We want to keep you engaged. We want to keep you meeting new people, and that's we don't have to put up walls and stop you from doing that in order to make money. In the future, I would predict credit card penetration will pick up, and that might be a more viable option, from the business perspective. But we'll see how long that takes. I mean, building a credit card infrastructure means you have to have address verification in place, means you have to have a credit system in place, means you have a fairly integrated banking system, and so we'll see when that happens.
Have you thought about monetizing the diaspora?
Say the diaspora?
Yeah.
We don't really spend a lot of time thinking about that. I think it's probably a pretty good short-term business opportunity, but in the long run, I just don't see it as a viable option. I mean, we want to invest things where we see permanence, where we see a presence in 10 years. And just fundamentally, I think the U.S. market is shrinking because, South Asians here, I don't think they'll forever want to only marry South Asians. I think it's right now we're in an interesting time frame where a lot of this immigration from South Asia to the U.S. occurred in the 80s. So, for example, my parents they immigrated from India, and as the generations continue, I happen to be married to an Indian person because we have that's just happened to be the case. But there are some advantages that we're socially a bit more fluent with one another, culturally fluent, and we had some of the similar experiences growing up, which is great. But I could have just as easily married someone not of South Asian descent, and I'm sure my kids will feel the same way. And just in terms of probabilities, they'll gravitate towards people marrying, non-South Asians. Yeah, so I think we don't invest much time into it, to answer your question.
So would you describe myZamana as a social discovery site? Is that a good title for this section of the industry, do you think?
Yeah, I think that could work. Again, this is like, these definitions really depend on, these are like the interpretation, how they're interpreted, and the markets, and I guess that works though.
Right. Ashish Kundra, you're the CEO and founder of myZamana. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Mark.